Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to continue our conversation series with people who I think have a lot to say about rewilding health, about a more expansive view of what health and healing is in a way that harmonizes with our physiology and with the ecosystem rather than trying to dominate it. And today I have Perdita here with me, Perdita Finn, who I have adored and followed her work for many years now. I first learned of her reading the book The Way of the Rose, which is about praying the rosary, but far beyond simply just the Catholic experience of praying the rosary. Really a way to connect to the divine no matter what your spirituality is. And have continued to follow her work as it's kind of amazingly paralleled my own spiritual life with ancestral connection and many other facets. And so I'm really excited to have her here to talk about how prayer and ancestral connection really, of course it's important spiritually, but how it also brings healing and wellness and well-being into our lives. And so I'd love to have Perdita introduce herself a little bit, and then we'll kind of roll from there.
Well, I am the daughter of an atheist doctor, so, who I spent a lot of time with as a child. He was a small country doctor. He was a surgeon, but in those days, people didn't specialize, which meant that he worked the ER. He saw general practitioner patients. I often sat in the ER with a prescription pad doodling when he got called in for an emergency. I followed him into the OR to watch him do operations. He operated on our pets in the hospital ER. So, I grew up in a hospital setting, but I grew up with a man who really rebelled against what he experienced as the kind of superstitious fundamentalism of his immigrant parents' Catholicism. He didn't let my grandmother take us to church or even spend much time with her. And he would often say, like, oh, when my sister had pneumonia, she gathered us all around her bed and made us pray the rosary all night. And, what, stupid. And the missing pieces of that story where it was 1929, there were no antibiotics, she had no money, and it was very likely this young girl could die of pneumonia, right? And so she did the only thing she could do, which was pray. And the other thing that's left out of that story is that little girl got better and lived to be a 96-year-old woman, my aunt. So you know what I mean? Like, and my father loved to quote the French philosopher Emile Zola, who says, show me, there are a lot of crutches and wheelchairs at Lourdes, but there are no wooden legs, as if to dismiss the possibility of the healing miracle. But one of the things that was interesting about my father, and in many ways, my whole life is both a reaction to and a conversation with him. My book, Take Back the Magic, is about our relationship after he died. Because, I'd get him out on a boat when he was a little less stressed out and tired. It was the only place he could escape the phone from the hospital. And I'd say, yeah, but haven't you seen some weird stuff? And he had. The person he opened up, riddled with cancer, with nothing he could do, who he had to close back up, he'd run into 10 years later in the parking lot and say, Doc, whatever you did, it did the trick. I've been just great. He would tell me that story. And then he would describe the person who he would open up and nothing was the matter. And they died a day later. And he was somebody who was assaulted by mystery, but he had no container for it other than what was for him a very repressive experience as a child. So in many ways, what I have done is try to recover what was really good and healing in my grandmother's faith and to offer it back to my father, wherever he is now.
That's really beautiful. I find myself kind of right in between the two of you, I think, as far as like where I've ended up in my life, because I grew up in the Catholic faith, and I was kind of too young for it to be like an abusive experience, but I went to Catholic school for 9 years and it wasn't an enjoyable experience. And so and I think that when you're a young person, it's really hard to hold both kind of the beauty of Jesus and Mary and the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church at the same time. And so I've in middle age, I am more capable of doing that than I was before.
One of
Um,
the things that, people, I'm not Catholic. I didn't grow up Catholic. And I did convert to Catholicism for about 15 minutes when I was 22 years old. Um, then I had an abortion, so it didn't take, you know what I mean? Like, which was an extraordinary spiritual initiation, which I can talk about. No fun, but a real initiation, which we've forgotten how to talk about and think about these experiences with generosity for everybody, for all souls. Um, but I'm not Catholic now, and I'm not Christian, and I'm not anything. I'm an animal trying to remember how to be a good animal. The rosary, for me, my husband and I wrote a book about it, and we do pray the rosary, but we pray the rosary in a community that is not affiliated with the Catholic Church. We're seeking to build a new one and devoted to the Lady and the Mother, by any name you want to call her. And I really do mean by any name you want to call her. So, what does it mean for me? That mother is the earth beneath my feet. So, what does it mean to be devoted to the earth and not to an institution or an idea or a singular God with that's abstract, wreaking havoc on human beings? I mean, I do believe I'm quite fond of Jesus. One hates to say it in this culture today, but Jesus seemed to be trying to say the same thing, as far as I can tell. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with his teachings, and he's saying to us, "Don't be anyone. Be a passerby. Be no one. I don't want you to be something. I want you to be a bird of the air, a flower in the field. Share food. Be nice." Live with all of nature. He's trying to remind people how to be hunter-gatherers again, as far as I can tell, ecologically.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say that when you kind of mentioned feeling separate from it, I think that Jesus and Mary, like the world they lived in, was very animist, right?
It
Uh,
was,
and
and quite literally, like, I mean, my daughter has written a lot about this and knows it even more than I do. But Jesus came to Galilee, where Jesus is from, and as the area he was from was an area that was really folk Judaism. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't Jerusalem. It wasn't the scribe. He was probably illiterate. So he was living in a culture that had traditions going back tens of thousands of years in relationship to the land,
hmm, wow.
that he was experiencing being wiped out by Roman Empire,
Hmm.
right? The Roman Empire was coming in and quite literally kicking people off their land, destroying their traditions, and killing them. So, not a minor moment.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Talking about tens of thousands of years of tradition makes me think like maybe I'll just kind of jump into right now the rosary, if you would tell us about the pre-Christian tradition of the rosary.
I'll tell you what I always do with people, which is beads, circular things with a hole through the middle. They have found them over 150,000 years old.
Mm.
Okay, so right back to our origins as a species, one of the first things we start making are beads. Beads are really hard to make if you're making them from stone or clay or shells, because it takes a lot of fine work. You know what I mean? Like, you try to make a bead with a hole through the middle, it's really hard, Why would you devote so much energy to this item that's simply decorative, seemingly? And so what I would invite people who are listening to do is to find a bead on your person. You might have a button, you might have an earring, you might, if you don't have anything, take a little bit of fuzz you find somewhere and just roll it between your thumb and your forefinger, and take a moment and just keep rubbing your thumb and your forefinger together as if a bead was between them, or if you have a button, roll it between them. Try it and tell me how it makes you feel. That gesture.
There is like I mean, a piece to it, but that feels too simplistic. There's like a
Just say
different,
it.
yeah.
Say it
What's that?
simplistically. Say it simplistically.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's soothing. Yeah, to just
It's
yeah.
incredibly soothing, right? We even have fidget spinners. Remember the age of the fidget spinner for that. And it's something we might do if we're anxious, is just rub a little piece of cloth between our fingers or rub, children will rub a bit of hair. That gesture is our primal gesture as a human being. And what a bead is a nipple.
Hmm.
When a baby is born, it reaches for the nipple and it rubs it between its thumb and a forefinger to let the milk let down. And it's a gesture it releases prolactin in the mother's body, that soothing hormone, and it releases prolactin in the baby's body. So it creates that nursing, that feeling when you're nursing of just like ecstasy, right? Once you get through the first couple of hard days, and then and then, but it's the same hormone that lets down, that lets mother birds roost on their eggs. It's this incredibly kind of ecstatic hormone, and when we rub a bead between our fingers, our bodies remember that gesture, and that hormone lets down in our bodies. So it's not a minor soothing. It is the most primal soothing experience of all. In fact, there have been so many studies done on meditation and only a very, very few studies done on bead practices. But it turns out these old grandmothers in Italy rubbing their beads together are in a state that's more advanced than the most advanced lamas in Tibet. Just so you know, like, you know what I mean? Like that's the experience. And so it is very soothing. And our ancestors knew that. And so the beads they made were a way of creating their connection to the earth and to getting the milk of the earth to let down and nourish them and soothe them and console them in moments of crisis. They're not minor. Those beads became also associated with prayers very, very early on, counting, this meant in traditions all over the world. Trace any religion back, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, and you will find a tradition of using beads for prayer. It starts with beads for prayer. And so the rosary is just a modern development of these particular prayers with this particular number of beads. We have malas. A japa mala in India is called a muttering garland. A muttering garland. I'm muttering my prayers and I'm saying there are rosaries everywhere, and there are worry beads and tefillin, and there are all kinds of beads and traditions. And the rosary is really a way of muttering prayers, and that muttering prayer feeling, and the word for mantra in Tibet is purr, the same as like a cat purring. And so we say our prayers and we purr and we feel consoled. We're like a baby at the breast going, oh, finally I can relax. It turns out it's very good for us physically. You could do a lot of fancy vagal nerve toning, or you could say the rosary like your great-great-grandmother.
Yeah, the science on prayer is really interesting, right? Because it's almost impossible to have a control, because like I might say, hey, this group over here don't pray, but we can't control for like who else is praying for you
You know
or
about the
these other
famous
things.
Duke University study on heart attack patients, right?
I am not remembering it right now, so please tell us.
So I forget who tells the story. I can't remember who tells it, but there was a study done at Duke University where they do a lot of research. They have a kind of spiritual psychic center there at Duke University, and they wanted to research the effects of prayer. And so what they did is they had people who are coming in a cardiac unit post heart attack, right? And so they survived their heart attacks, right? But they wanted to look at recovery. So they had a group of people who did not know the people they were praying for another group of people by name recovering in the cardiac unit. And then there was another group in the cardiac unit who weren't getting any prayers from anybody that anybody knew about. The group who were getting the prayers from these people they didn't know did so much better. They had to stop the study and get everyone included in it.
Wow.
How does it work? I don't know. So if I come back to Lourdes, okay, and my father always cited that story as the definitive, the hucksters in the Catholic Church, nobody's getting better. Where are the wooden legs, But I want you to think about that man who's an amputee who goes to Lourdes. And maybe he has terrible pain in his phantom limb. And if anyone, I'm sure you've heard about those pains. They're supposed to be horrific to have pain or itching in your phantom limb that you can't do anything about. And it's a real problem, right? Or what if he can't work and he's depressed and he feels suicidal? And what if he feels just distraught and despair? No, his leg didn't grow back at Lourdes. But what if he comes home and the pain in his phantom limb is gone? What if he comes home and feels a renewed sense of purpose and hopefulness? Isn't that a miracle? I think sometimes the miracles we're looking for in our world are very technological. We have been conditioned by industry and technology to look for, the sun spinning in the sky and rainbows falling all around, or some kind of Disney fantasy of an instantaneous remission or an instantaneous cure. But sometimes the miracle is very, very personal and very, very ordinary. I mean, I can tell you a beautiful miracle I experienced. And my sister has had a hard life. And I always say she had bad luck and worse choices, and her health wasn't very good from a lot of those choices. She smoked cigarettes, she had a stroke, then she quit cigarettes, but she didn't take care of herself. She didn't wear a seatbelt, she got in bad car accidents. She also had polycystic kidney disease that nobody treated or dealt with. And when she was in her late 60s, she went into full-on kidney failure and had to get on dialysis. And she was not somebody who was a model of people who know how to take care of themselves in that situation. She was trying, you know what I mean? She said, I'm eating my blueberries, Okay, are you drinking soda? Maybe, I don't know. And she wasn't doing very well on dialysis. They couldn't get a port in her. She kept going into, her blood pressure kept. Dialysis is a horrific experience. I mean, it keeps you alive, but it is horrific. You can't travel. You're stuck doing this experience. And on my mother's birthday 3 years ago, her nephrologist came to the kidney center and said to my sister, your numbers are in. Your kidneys have completely healed. My sister wasn't praying for a miracle. The miracle came to her, and my sister, who had never felt any faith in her life in anything, and had felt pretty much like a pretty worthless human being, undeserving of such an experience, undeserving of asking for it, was graced with it. That's what grace is, right? But that miracle came to my sister on my mother's birthday. And my sister knew it. That it was a miracle handed to her by my mother. And my mother's birthday will be in 3 days, and I will think about that miracle. Now, my sister died a month ago, not of kidney disease, but of a fluke. She got the flu. She's not a complainer. She went to the hospital too late. She went into septic shock and she died. But she died healed. She died feeling like a miracle and worthy of a miracle. And a week after she died, she came to me in a dream and said, are you going to have a miracle too? I think you should have a miracle too. And so there are vast mysteries. My sister was healed. She also died. But she died having been healed, having experienced a miracle. Her nephrologist came to her deathbed, stricken. She loved my sister so much. She'd never had anybody get off of dialysis, not one patient. And she had loved my sister so much, and she couldn't believe it. Like, it's like no fair, but we all die. So, can we have a miracle and still die? We will all still die. Can we be healed and still die? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right that our attitude about miracles now is sort of like it can only be a miracle if there is no possible alternative rational explanation for it counting as a miracle. Yeah.
Well, and also people want some external evidence. We live in this an age of scientific fundamentalism, right?
Mhm.
We have too much Christian fundamentalism and we have too much scientific fundamentalism, right? Like, so I've the miracle my sister wants for me is I recently this fall was diagnosed with alpha galactic syndrome, which is a tick-borne illness that makes you allergic, badly allergic to all mammalian products. Okay, there's no treatment, there's no cure, except many people are reporting that they go into remission after getting this very peculiar acupuncture where they stick a bunch of needles in your ear and they stay in for 3 weeks. Okay. Is there any scientific basis for this? I don't know. Am I going to do it? Yeah. Of course I'm going to try it. Why not? A lot of people have said they went into remission from it. I would like to be in remission. I can't even go to the grocery store right now. So because of the fumes of cooking meat. And I went into anaphylaxis again on Christmas Eve because I walked into a grocery store where they were cooking ham or something and I did ugh. Anyway, so yeah, I'm willing to try it. You know, I hope I'm one of the early test subjects. Maybe I'm not. Maybe it's BS. Maybe it won't work on me. Why not try it? I am also going to my allergist. I'm also taking pharmaceuticals. You know what I mean? I'm on an H1 and an H2 blocker, and I carry an EpiPen. I'm also working with a naturopath and I'm drinking my nettle tea and my tulsi tea and I'm taking, I'm doing all kinds of things to help my body. So if I go into remission from this thing, is that a miracle? Huh. It won't be a miracle that anyone externally will write down in a book, but it will be a miracle I may claim for myself. If I can feel safe in the world again, that will be a miracle for me.
Mhm.
And what happens when we stop being so institutional about our miracles and let them become personal and intimate again? And
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen this as a doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say that as far as kind of regarding your father's attitude toward miracles and things like that, is that, I don't know that there are that many things that I've seen that I would be like, oh, in medicine that I would be like, oh, that's for sure a miracle. But on the other hand, there are many things that I've seen that I would say I don't have a rational explanation for why that happened,
That's
right?
it, right? And the mystery, right?
Yeah.
And also, my father, because it was a different era of medicine, right? It was before everything got so litigious. He often talked to me about the theater of medicine, and then a lot of what he did with theater. So somebody comes in and there's nothing he can do for this person, and he says, I've got this experimental drug, it's really kind of off market. I probably shouldn't give it to you, but you know what? They've been showing a lot of success. And he would have sugar pills. And he would hand this person some sugar pills. And then come back a week later and said, amazing. They worked, no side effects. Now, my father engaged in that kind of healing. He believed in that kind of healing, that you could talk to someone in such a way that they might heal. Now, we don't do that anymore because of a litigious world, right? You'd be a huckster and a fraud, except that I don't know what the placebo effect is so powerful that they have to deal with it when they do scientific studies, right? Why aren't we studying placebos? Why aren't we playing with placebos? Why aren't we activating placebos? What we see in medicine, I have a daughter with a chronic illness, as I know who writes about chronic illness, and we've been to a lot of doctors. And many of the doctors employ not placebos, but nocebos. We were seeing this immunologist, and she started listing all the things that were going to go wrong for my daughter. And my daughter began to manifest those things only after the doctor had said this was going to happen. And then we stopped going to this doctor.
Yeah, I think one of the people I spoke to early in this series of interviews is Stephen Martin, and he's an herbalist and a farmer, and he wrote about the spells that we create with our words. Um,
Yeah.
and in medicine, I think especially because of just where we are sort of in the hierarchy of society, the spells we create with our words um, end up being, I think, a lot more powerful than we realize because we're just kind of like, oh, I'm just a regular person, not sort of realizing how our status influences people. Uh,
And also, if we begin to engage with the mystery, doctors no longer touch people.
hmm.
They no longer make eye contact with them. They don't even, they almost rarely examine people thoroughly. You used to get a real exam, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and yes, of course, probably a CAT scan is better, right? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's going to see a lot of stuff. But there is something about the feeling of being touched and seen and known. My father even used to talk about, he did house calls, he was an old-fashioned rural doctor. And in fact, I would often go on house calls with him. And he was seeing things, not just about the body of the person, but their ecosystem, right? Who needed help, who needed support, who wasn't really taking their medicine, who wasn't eating, who couldn't afford to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a dream of mine too, is to be a doctor that can do house calls just like within biking distance of my house. But
Call the midwife. We need call the midwife.
it's tough because there are so many structural barriers to that, of
Oh,
like me carrying my own malpractice insurance is, it's not as experienced as I had sort of catastrophized it to be for myself, but it is, it's definitely a barrier, especially if you're kind of doing it like charging people a reasonable amount of money.
well, let me
But
talk
yeah,
about malpractice insurance because I
yeah.
think we were in an interesting problem with it, right?
Mm.
And I say this as somebody who's seen some pretty good malpractice in my days. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna say, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
ooh. um, but we have this fantasy that we're not going to die, that we can somehow defeat old age, sickness, and death, that they're not inevitable for every single soul. Like planets die, stars die, everything dies. And because we treat in this culture death like it's an accident, a mistake,
Mm.
instead of an inevitability. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes, absolutely.
and I could feel even the doctors and the nurses, loving as they were when my sister was dying, the terror, like that they couldn't do anything. They needed to let us know that they tried their best. And I wanted to say, I can tell you did your best. This is something that's happening,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Well, I think
And
that the culture of medicine is such that it's exactly as you said, that death is viewed, this thing that's inevitable is viewed as a failure. And
right, you failed as a doctor.
yeah. And so it's kind of an interesting thing as far as people's emotional well-being, right? If like you couldn't stop this thing that is going to happen inevitably. And of course not everyone is dying all the time, right? Like some things are preventable or treatable or whatever,
Right.
but
I mean, I just watched a TV
eventually,
series about Andrew Garfield and how he went septic from his medicine. Like, you do hope people are sterilizing their hands. You know what I mean? People make mistakes and they need to be held accountable for their egregious mistakes. But I do think in this litigious world we live in, people are surprised by death in a way that I don't think we used to be.
I agree with that for sure. I think you can tell that even if you travel to different cultures, I think that people are not surprised by death in the same way.
My father was so interesting, at 84. He'd had bladder cancer, which had been successfully treated, but he had a little blood in his urine. So he went over to the hospital. He wasn't working anymore. He said, "Let me just give myself a CAT scan." Let him give himself a CAT scan, which he read. And then he got on the phone. He said, "I'm gonna be dead in a month. You better come up and say goodbye." His body was filled with cancer. I said, "Aren't you gonna do anything?" "I'm gonna die. Come say goodbye. I want to do anything." He said, "The last thing I want to do is be in a hospital." So we all went up to be with him. And I thought I'm going I'm going to get an Airbnb for a month and I'm going to stay here and be with him. And he watched the Red Sox win and he went to bed and he died that night. And he just said, I'm not sticking around. I'm not fighting this. This is it. And there was something really powerful to watch him do it. Like the last thing he always used to say, don't go to a hospital, go to the Ritz. It's cheaper and the food will be better, but he died in his bed and when he died, we were able to keep him in his bed for 24 hours and all of his grandchildren came and got into bed with him after he died and held him. And everyone was singing with him as he died. And, I think we should think more about how we want to die and what happens afterwards. Anyway, I work with the dead. So it doesn't feel like the end to me. I mean, it's really heartbreaking when someone goes really quickly, and I don't want to mitigate that, but
Yeah, I think that we've let our fear of the grief really put up this huge barrier to kind of facing death head on, and to even contemplating what could be afterward, or kind of staying porous enough to receive sort of those conversations that the ancestors are trying
a lot of
to.
my other work, other than I pray the rosary, but I also, I teach people how to connect with those on the other side. And I had a life-changing experience. I had been engaged in a very personal, private practice of calling on the dead, right? Like I couldn't even have told you what I was doing. I call on the dead. But after my father died, my daughter became very ill. And, because of my father, I was trained to imagine we go to the best guy in New York, the guy, and we get the best diagnosis and we get the pill and she's going to be all better. We're going to go out of pocket. We're going to solve this thing. So we mortgaged our house and we maxed out our credit cards and we got in trouble with the IRS for not paying our taxes. And we went to one doctor after another, all of whom told us our daughter was incredibly sick and they didn't know why. And we reached the end of our rope. And our money, and we lost our jobs and we lost our work. We were about to lose our house. We had no money. We had a kid lying in bed screaming, saying, "Get me out of my body," and no idea what to do. And a friend of mine came to me at the gym and said, "You need to consult my psychic friend." I'm like, "Oh God, I hate living in Woodstock. I hate it. I don't want a psychic friend. I need a doctor. I got a sick kid." And I came home and Sophie was just there weeping in pain. And I didn't know what to do. So I went to the psychic. Now, do you mind if I swear? Is it all right if I use some bad language?
Oh, it's fine.
So in the days before pagers and answering machines and answering phones, this is in the 1960s, the emergency room in the hospital and the operating room would call our home family line. There's one phone in the kitchen and they would call it. And my father, whenever he answered the phone, would always answer it the same way. You have to remember, he was one of two surgeons and doctors in this area. His partner was a drunk. And so he was on 24/7. And the people he was seeing were the people he knew. Do you know what I mean? When he showed up for a car accident, it was his best friend's wife he was stitching back together. You know what I mean? So he was under stress. He was stressed, but he would answer the phone. Jesus H fucking Christ, what is it this time? And, it might be one of my friends calling for homework and they'd say, hi, Dr. Finn, can I talk to Perdita? I mean, like, that's always the way he answered the phone. He was irascible and angry and stressed and upset much of the time. Things got better when he retired. But I walked into this psychic's room. I don't know what was going to happen. I'd never been psychic. I felt ashamed. And she looked at me and she said, oh, she said, your dad is here. Your dad brought you to me. Your dad says, I'm the specialist you need. But forgive me. You know what he's saying? He's saying, Jesus saved fucking Christ, Perdita. What is it this time? How could I screamed at the top of my lungs because it was as if my whole reality got turned inside out. Like I'd been praying to the dead, but a part of me didn't think what I was doing was real. And it was real. And my father showed up. And my father said, what you need to get this kid better is a psychic, not a doctor. And so I also saw that my father, my atheist father, had also had a shift in perspective, shall we say. Anyway, the psychic became a beloved friend, and I wrote a book with her really to learn about what she did and what she saw, and to collaborate with her on my daughter's healing. And she led us to herbalists and doctors and guidance. And sometimes, I have this fantasy about healing that we are so binary in this culture between, Western medicine and New Age medicine, so much so that I saw a woman recently, and it was very upsetting to me, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, who refused Western medical treatment, early breast cancer. And she was going to do it all with vitamins and herbs. And it upset her children, and they became alienated from her. And she died very quickly, very painfully and horribly. And one of the last things she said to me when I talked to her, and I felt in such a tricky position, was, I've been praying, I've been taking my herbs, but I should have just gotten chemo. And, sometimes I wonder, what if we didn't exclude, what if we didn't have to be purists? What if we did everything? That's what I'm like, my alpha gal right now. I'm going to the allergist, I'm going to the naturopath, I'm going to the acupuncturist, and I have a team of the dead I work with every morning. I don't care how it happens, my healing. If it's the drugs, fantastic. You know what I mean? Like if it's this, fantastic. I think we've gotten to be, I think we've become such purists that we don't see the synergy. What happens when because I wrote about my father, the doctor, a lot of doctors, ER doctors, women always, have contacted me to tell me about calling in the dead to help them in the ER. And I love that. I love that. Like we need both.
Yeah. Yeah, on a much smaller scale, as far as like kind of casting aside Western medicine, I had a frozen shoulder a few years ago during the pandemic. So I like couldn't move my shoulder. I couldn't clasp my bra and that kind of stuff. And I did acupuncture, I did massage, I did all sorts of things. And then like it wasn't really helping. I was doing all these exercises, and finally I went to a doctor. They did an injection in my shoulder, and it didn't immediately cure the whole thing, but it was so much better. And it was one of those moments that even I, as a doctor, was like, "Oh, wow, this Western medicine stuff really works." And it was I just felt so ridiculous that I had been so resistant to it. But
I mean, that's the thing. We can become purists in ways we shouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, oh, x-rays are great. Like an x-ray is a great thing. A CAT scan is a great thing, right? Like thank God we have these tests. Thank God we have these abilities, right? It's just amazing. Why are we denying ourselves anything? Why aren't we just seeing what happens when we throw it all into the cauldron? I mean, my veterinarian, he just retired. And I mean, I used to say, could you just be my doctor? He was so great. But here's some of the things about my veterinarian. And this was an old school vet. He just retired. He didn't have to have malpractice insurance. People accept that animals die,
Mm.
right? Well, he did, in addition to being a great vet, he also was interested in acupuncture and Chinese herbs. So thanks to him, my dachshund made it to 18 and a half walking with great, but he got acupuncture and Chinese herbs and all this stuff. And at the end, he was having a bit of trouble. And the doctor said to me, you know what? He said, I think I'm going to start injecting him with steroids in the acupuncture points. That's going to really give him a boost. Would you like that? I said, well, what are the long-term side effects of that? He said, well, not great. He said, but he doesn't have a long-term. Well, how do we give him a lot of fun at the end? It was amazing. He went on another year and a half running around. He attacked a bear, He was great. He was happy. And I just thought like he was able to have a lot of things in his wheelhouse as a doctor, but he also didn't, there was also, I knew the dog was going to die. He knew the dog was going to die. How about we just figure out how to make him feel better?
Mhm.
Sophie Strait. Sorry, I apologize. I forgot to turn off my phone. I apologize. But yeah, I mean, I think I wonder like what would happen if we used it all.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that your idea to go around and see what everyone's got, different
Yeah.
skills?
Yeah. And I think about that even with my own interests and my own, like I would love to be able to say to someone, hey, you've got influenza, let me make you this Mullen tea. And not only is that like there's pretty good evidence to support the use of Mullen tea for cough, but also like imagine just how like soul soothing that would be for your doctor to be like, hey, I'm gonna give you this bag of tea, but here, let me pour you a cup of it right now, and you drink it while we're talking. And like, I would love to be able to do that, but the system isn't really set up for that. And
No.
also, like, I still even now feel a little weird about those times where I go off doctor script and I'm just like, hey, person to person, this is what I think is actually going to work.
Absolutely, right? Like and also the making of a cup of tea and the offering of a cup of tea is one of the oldest ritual gestures too. It's
Mhm.
it what happens when we create trust between a patient and a doctor again? And we have eroded trust in our system, right? I mean, I don't want to blame the doctors. I am not a doctor blamer because I feel like we are asking too much of our doctors and the corporate capitalist system in our country, I mean, is horrific for what we've done to medicine. We ought to be paying doctors a lot. I mean, I think primary care doctors and emergency room doctors should be the people who are making the most money, not the plastic surgeons, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's become kind of a runaway train. I think even insurance companies at this point, with the system set up as it is, the system doesn't serve them. Like, and it's like if it's not even serving them who are supposed to financially benefit from all of this, it's just totally not fit for purpose. But now the money's so bad that everyone is just kind of like, well, we just have to control costs instead of saying, none of this was ever built for the purpose. The entire American healthcare system is just a patch to fix this hole and a patch to fix this hole and a patch to fix this hole instead of saying, these are our values, these are our goals, let's design a system
What would a
that.
preventative healthcare system look like? And I mean, I also think like, I mean, I'm a great fan of the British television series called The Midwife, which is interestingly about a group of nuns, so spiritual healers, who are also practical midwives hired by the newly installed national health care to go into one of the poorest areas in England and begin to offer health care, right? Like to try and, like, oh my God, And these midwives arrive, and sometimes they're making a cup of tea and just trying to get, clean sheets put down on the bed, right? Or food in the house, and they're not above like sweeping up and cleaning up and doing the dishes. And so there's a tremendous sense of their community resource. But the other thing is there are all these young women given meaningful work. right? Really meaningful work. And I remember my mother got her first job through the WPA, FDR's WPA in the 1930s. And she was part of a theater company tasked with bringing Shakespeare to West Virginia and the Appalachia, right? Like, so she was part of all these people making money, and it changed her life. Changed her life in two ways. One, it showed her something she loved to do and taught her a lot about it. And the other was she was out in the world helping people, which she never stopped doing. And what if we took all of our considerable resources and began helping people? I mean, this is my prayer. Can we help people? And then people who feel aimless and lost and despairing, what if we train them to start helping people instead of hurting people?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's funny and well, not funny. My daughters give me the business for she's like they're like grown-ups use the word funny too much about things that aren't actually funny. But that I think a lot of it is about trust, right? About like who we are willing to trust to let into our
Right.
homes, who we are willing, like who we trust to say, hey, if things really collapse around me, are going to surround me and lift me up. And and like that, like I think about it as far as like the way that the system is set up that a lot of people who have to work would rather be at home either caring for their children or caring for their elders, right? Um,
Yes.
but
Yes.
like they can't do it because they lose their job and then, everything kind of crumbles around
And
them.
so they have to warehouse their children and warehouse their old people to other people who aren't making enough money. I mean,
Mhm.
it's nuts.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I want to talk a little bit more about ancestors.
Mm.
And so would you say that the time with the psychic was kind of like your origin story as far as really
It's
building the
not really,
relationship with
because
the
for about 20 years before that, I was working with the dead.
Oh, okay.
And astrologers will tell you, I'm not very good at astrology, but apparently all my planets are in the eighth house of death. So I'm sort of, this has been my calling for a long time. It was the moment when what I was doing became real for me. And and I call on the dead for help. And I think that it's a lost art of magic. It used to be that we knew that to summon help from the other side was something healers did. In fact, what was a shaman or a spirit worker or a healer in an indigenous culture, but somebody who can summon help from the other side, be it animal, be it plant, be it ancestral. And so knowing how to summon help and experiencing receiving help and feeling worthy of help is a lot of what I teach people to do. And I my my father helps me all the time. My mother helps me all the time. My mother brought my sister a miracle on her birthday. The dead have their tells, right? I have a whole healing team. I just like those people in the Duke study, they were connected to people they didn't know who were praying for them. I accept help from any of the dead. So I, in my Substack, said to people, I've got this horrible allergy syndrome, and I don't want to be so reactive. I'm reactive to the smells of cooking meat. I go into anaphylaxis from it, and it's really no fun and scary, and it makes being out in the world scary. And I want to go into remission from that. And so I asked people, send me your dead. One woman sent me her grandmother from the Civil War to help my body stop being at war with itself. Another woman sent me a friend of hers who'd been an herbalist. Another sent me her great grandfather, who was a compounding pharmacist. I work with a compounding pharmacist, right? And then somebody else sent me her grandfather, who got bit by so many ticks that he became immune to tick bites. So I have this whole team. There are about 37 people 37 souls on the other side. They're not just people, because there's a cat called Ginger the cat. I call him Ginger the cat. And I got diagnosed on St. Francis's feast day. On St. Francis's feast day, I found out I'm allergic to mammals. So I feel like I've been tasked with something pretty intense and profound in my relationship to food. And, Francis was a vegetarian. And anyway, I have an incredible healing team with me. But I call on the dead for help with everything. In the old days, I'm fascinated by the lore of the saints, which is really just ancestor practice. And every body part has a saint attached to that body part. Ooh, Saint Blaise if you got throat problems. Ooh, Saint Roque if you got knee problems. You know what I mean? Like Saint Dymphna if you've got emotional problems. And in fact, there's a tradition of creating body parts and bringing them to different saints. And there's a popular medieval image of Mary Magdalene, and she was said to be flown up to heaven each day and back, and she's holding out her arms to be flown to heaven by the angels. But every angel is holding a different joint and a different body part, an angel for every rib, an angel for every hip, knee, toe. And I think those are ancestors and saints that lift us up and hold us. And what if we knew how to call upon these saints and ancestors and beings to facilitate healing? So every time I take my pharmaceutical medicine, my compounded Allegra and Pepcid, my H1 and H2 blocker to bring down my reactivity, I don't just take my medicine. I stand before my medicine and call in my ancestral team. Make the medicine work. Make it work better.
Can you say a little bit more about kind of like the how you call on them, like the how you interact with the ancestors, like the practical?
So I'm going to give you, okay, this is my short, what I'm going to tell you in 1 minute. If you really did it, you would learn everything you need to know about how to work with the dead. Nobody does this. And that's why they come to take workshops with me, so that I can help them actually do what I'm going to tell you. But if you just did this, the dead are real. They're really there. All the ancestors, all the dead who have ever been that you don't remember you. And I'm not just talking about your biological relatives. I am talking about your teachers, your neighbors, your pets, your friends, the trees that offered you shade. I'm talking about your mothers and fathers from lifetimes you don't even remember, your orca mothers, your seal mothers, your tree mothers, your mountain mothers. All of these souls remember you. All of these souls want to bring graces and blessings to you as surely as my mother brought a healing to my sister. Make a list of them. Get to know them. Know who they are. Write down the name of every dead person you've ever met and every dead person who's ever come into your life that you haven't met. I pray to many dead I haven't ever met. Saints, people's names and graveyards. I could go on about this for hours. Then here's the hardest thing nobody wants to do. Ask for help. Ask for daily, moment by moment help. Ask somebody on the other side for help. They're all specialists. Some are good with knees, some are good with hips, some are good with blood, some are good with plumbing, some are good with electricity. Call on them for help. Call on them for help. I think he's in the shower, so he won't hear me tell the story. It's about my husband. So my husband's stepfather, who raised him, died at 91, and they had a very complicated relationship. And they had tried to heal before he died, but in a certain sense, my husband could only realize how angry he was at his stepfather after he died. And he only felt safe to be angry at him after he died, right? So he wasn't calling on him for help. He wasn't asking him for help. Now, my father-in-law had a lot of prostate problems, and he died being catheterized. And it's awful being catheterized. It's a terrible, terrible experience, right? Anyway, my husband got into terrible prostate trouble, and they thought he was going to have to stay on a catheter. And they said, if he couldn't, start peeing, they're going to have to keep him on a catheter. It was horrible. And I went out into the waiting room, and the nurse said, I'm going to have to put it back in. Oh no. And I said to my father-in-law, you got to fix this. You got to bring us a miracle right now. And I will tell Clark, and Clark will start calling on you, and we're going to fix this, and we're not going to have any more trouble. A minute later, the nurse came out and said, oh, it's everything fine. He's peeing again. We don't need to do this. A minute before, she hadn't thought it was possible. She wouldn't have called it a miracle. Do you know what I mean? Like it was just a shift in his body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then my husband felt safe enough to start calling on his father.
Mhm.
And they're working together in many things.
Mhm.
And what the healing that I want to talk about that really happens, what happens when we heal with people and the stories we tell about the dead are never over. My book, Take Back the Magic, is about how I healed with my father after he died.
When you ask for help, do you speak it out loud? Are you thinking it?
So if I told you how to
Depending
make
on the
bread,
situation.
if I told you how to make bread, I would say, take some flour, take some water, get it to rise, and stick it in the oven, right?
Mhm.
About 1 in 500 people could go make bread with that recipe. You might want to take a class in making bread making because
Mhm.
there's a lot of art. The same is true of working with the dead. We used to know this as people. We used to summoning the dead was our spiritual practice. Okay, that was what we did. Gods and goddesses, saints, it was all just the dead. And you go back in any indigenous culture and they're working with the ancestors, they're not working with anything else. So, and those ancestral beings are moving between plants and animals and human beings. I mean, so there's a lot of art. And there's no way you can do it wrong. If you ask the dead for help with your day-to-day life, they will show up and make things happen. And they may not bring you an immediate remission from your stage 4 cancer, right? You know what I mean? Like they're not a vending machine. But maybe they will bring you a relief from pain from that day. Or maybe they will bring you the experimental immunotherapy treatment trial that you suddenly get included in, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. That's so, the phrase you used there was really interesting to me, because when I went on a wilderness fast a few years ago, that was one of the things one of the leaders really emphasized. They're like, you you can't F this up, like, and it's so interesting because I feel like I have been so in sort of like the gifted kid gold star, like I have to do it the right way kind of thing. But yeah, it's kind of like
but the flip side of the gifted kid is I'm not worthy without my gifts.
mm-hmm.
And the truth is, when we work with the dead, the hardest thing will be all of the blessings we receive that we don't feel worthy of.
Mm.
And I have seen people get what I call miracle whiplash because they receive so much and it so changes their sense of themselves and their worldview that they get scared. So it's good to have friends when you're doing this work to remind you you are worthy of a miracle. You are worthy of help. You are worthy of love and grace because everyone is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that I would say maybe over the past few months to a year, that my definition of a miracle has really changed, kind of like you were talking about, to be more so about like when that thing that is stuck gets unstuck. Um, like usually through forces that are outside of me, you know? Um,
And also sometimes also the other thing is, and this is part of the art of prayer, is knowing what you want.
mhm,
Because sometimes the obstacle appears to get us to go in a different direction,
mhm,
right? Like, so I got diagnosed with this thing, this alpha gal allergy, right? Like, but what is my prayer? I'm 63 years old. I don't have grandchildren yet. Not only do I want grandchildren, I want to be one of those grandmothers who's out in the backyard building forts with the kids. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be really active. I want to be one of those 90, I want to be like my grandmother, who at 93, I came by and said, Gammy, how are you? And she said, bad. She said, it took me all day to mow the lawn. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to be that woman. And, and I'd been feeling sick the past year from this damn thing, right? But this alpha gal allergy that has me not eating meat, not eating dairy, I've lost so much weight on it. In fact, in the support groups of alpha gal, people say, it's a weird backhanded blessing. My numbers are better, my health is better. One epidemiologist said, maybe everybody in America should get bitten by this tick. Maybe this is the answer to my prayer. I don't want to be fume reactive. So, and now I'm doing all these things for my immune system, right? I've never been healthier.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we get an obstacle. You got a frozen shoulder, and it reaffirmed your faith in medicine.
Yeah. So one of the big miracles that has come this year for me, like I think I had been having a bit of an existential crisis about my career.
Yes.
And I'm prone to existential crises, so it's not like anything too new. But and then we found out that a retirement account that we had that had almost a year's worth of expenses in it, that we couldn't actually access it. And so it was like, oh, okay, now a decision has to be made and I have to do something. And so I was really asking several different ancestors for help kind of finding work that was going to meet our needs and be fulfilling. And it came in a really unexpected place. So I ended up taking a job with the company I had worked with before in their urgent care. But it has been a delight. Like
I
I had
love reading your piece about it. It was
yeah,
a wonderful piece.
I had been dreading it. I was kind of like, well, it's going to be less stressful and it'll be fine, but it's just, and then I got there and I was like, everyone's so nice and I'm really helping people. And yeah, it was just like, and so it is like one of those things that, like you said, no one would say that's a miracle, right? Because like I found a job, I applied for the job, and I got the job and I'm doing the job, right? But like I had been so stuck there trying to
Yes,
figure out what
exactly.
to do, and then I asked for help and it got unstuck.
And two things. You're also creating a miracle for other people, whether you realize it or not, because you in that job at urgent care are a miracle for many of the people coming in, somebody of your wisdom and experience. And you've also created a miracle for your kids because you now have a flexible schedule and you're less stressed. And you've created a miracle for yourself because you've allowed yourself off the hook. Do you know what I mean? Like when we call in a miracle for ourselves, that miracle flows to us, but it also flows in the 10 directions all around us,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like the miracle of me feeling better and healthier is able to take care of my husband, able to be there for my kids, do you know what I mean? Able to be there in the community, able to teach more. And you know what I mean? And so when I often talk about people sometimes say, oh, I don't want to pray selfishly. I want to pray for other people, not for myself. But you got to put on your own oxygen mask before you can do CPR on someone else.
Well, and so I do a West African style of divination. And when we were learning how to do that,
For Melodoma Same.
exactly, one of
Yes.
the people was divining for me. And she just kept being like, all of the wild spirits, all of your ancestors are just here being like, we want you to ask us for help. You need to ask for more help. And it was just one of those where I was just like, because I think it has become this weird, shameful thing to not be
Well,
totally
as an
independent and
American, to
individualistic.
ask for help is shameful, right?
Yeah.
You ought to be able to solve it yourself. And one of the things is what happens to our stress levels when I began asking for help. And actually I did a workshop with Melodoma Same years ago. And one of the best things I took from it was his affirmation that the most important gesture we can make is to ask the dead for help.
Mm.
There was nothing more important than that. And that daily ask is the most important thing. And it had been my experience. So it was a confirmation of what I was actually discovered myself. We had a wonderful conversation about it. I also think it's helpful to have an oracle system and a divination system, but I think you have to find, there's so many all around the world that you find the one that works for you. Like astrology works for some people. To me, it's calculus. Tarot works for some people. For me, it's, I don't know. My divinational system is the weather and the earth And I read the nature as my oracle card. So for me, that really works. You know what I mean? So everybody has their own divinational system. And it's good to learn these other languages of the unseen world, right?
Yeah.
And to learn them well. Like people who really learn tarot or astrology, and if nature is your system, you better know the trees and you better know their names and their seasons and their behaviors and their, right?
Mhm.
So it's good to have a divinational system. Um, but ask for help. We know to ask doctors for help. And I think maybe one of the interesting things I find so interesting about you, Amy, is that here you stand, the one place that we bring all of our cares, worries, and stresses, which is the doctor. The doctor still exists as the fantasy, the American fantasy of someone who can help us when no one else can, right? That's why everyone goes to the emergency room. I mean, the pit, right? It's this fantasy of I'm going to go to the emergency room and there's going to be somebody competent to take care of my problems because nowhere else in the world is there anyone competent. But there is. Every single soul on the other side is competent if we ask them for help. And a lot of our problems could be solved and our stresses could be relieved if we knew we weren't alone in the world.
Yeah. And I think that that is definitely true with people on the other side, but I think it's also true like human to human, right? As far as asking
Mm-hmm.
for, I think we've just gotten so bad at asking for help. So I have this special iron bracelet that I got as part of this divination thing, and I lost it out in our yard. And we have lots of tall grass in our yard. So losing a bracelet sometimes is like
Mm-hmm.
uh kind of it wasn't an easy thing to find. We kept going out and we couldn't find it. And I have a few friends that call me to ask for medical advice for their kids, and like that's fine. I enjoy doing it. And they were like, "Hey, we're going to send you a Target gift card." And I was like, "I really don't need a Target gift card." But I was like, "Hey, do you have a metal detector?" And he was like, "I don't, but I have a huge magnet." And so we took this huge magnet out, and there goes the bracelet. And and I just think that there are all of these kind of collaborative miracles out there that we're just sort of like our rationalist empirical minds are just closing us off to. Yeah.
We're closing out. We've forgotten that the whole world wants to help us become who we already are. The plants want to help us, the trees want to help us, the animals want to help us. If we knew how loved we were, it would break our hearts to see what
Mm.
we're doing to the earth.
Yeah. I think kids kind of know that,
Yeah.
is my sense. And
That's why I
then,
like to be with children so much.
yeah.
Children still remember and old people know. And who do we warehouse? Our children and our old people. I always say children are elders returned, and I mean that literally.
Mm.
And yet they are the people we're not listening to. Amy, I am going to have to, I'm not sure how much more time we have together, but I am going to have to go at a certain moment.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. When do you need to get going?
Probably closer to 11:45. Is that
Oh,
okay?
oh yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, 11:45 for you. Should we just kind of maybe wrap up now? I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
maybe we
yeah,
can talk again sometime. Would that be
yeah,
okay?
yeah. I think that'd be fun to have it be
I'll
more
send you my
because,
newest book. How about that?
yeah, yeah, there'd be so much. I know we have so much to talk about. Well, maybe I'll just kind of close with a brief story of my daughter, kind of being my elder. This was
Yay.
so she just turned 10 last Friday. And this was back when she was 4. So we had been reading this really beautiful Advent book called All Creation Waits. And each day they take an animal and talk about sort of like an Advent message about, gathering together or trust or faith that spring will come or all sorts of things. And so on the day of Christmas, they talk about Jesus. And one of the things they're talking about is divine universal love.
Mhm.
And so I was asking her about that. I was like, well, what do you think you need to do to get that divine universal love? And she just looked at me and she's like, well, just be born. And to her it's so obvious, right? And to me, I'm just like, it's like,
It's also important to remember there's no one who's excluded from love.
yeah,
There's no one who's left out. I mean, I always say I don't leave out any of the dead because I don't want to live out. I work with the difficult dead. I work with the monsters. I work with because we're all monstrous, and I think the more we work with the dead and learn to see with the eyes of the dead while we're still alive, the more love we feel. The more we feel because what's really happens when we die, I think, is we remember how loved we are. And if we really lived knowing that, it would be a very different experience, I think.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so
Well,
much for
I
taking
wish
the
I was
time.
encountering you at my urgent care. I would love a cup of Mullen tea. My
Yeah,
my my
that
son's
makes
partner.
me, yeah, like that, thinking of that makes me wonder, because like there are electric tea kettles. Like I'm starting to wonder, like, is
I
there
think you
a way
should
to
do
make
it.
this
And
work?
I really think you should do it. And I think, it's interesting when I was a high school teacher and horrible public high schools in my 20s, one of the things I decided is what my kids needed was beauty, that this
Mm.
building offered no beauty. So I painted my room and I filled it with beautiful chairs and bookcases. I brought all my books into my classroom and I had a tea kettle and you could make cocoa and tea when you came in and we could sit on chairs and we could talk about books because talking about books wasn't about getting right or wrong answers as it was about being invited into a world of gracious literacy. You know what I mean? And what if we were creating healing environments for people like that?
Yeah,
You
I think
know?
I think health and beauty, I think we've come to have this really distorted idea of what beauty is, from magazines and popular media and things like that. And
Oh,
that, but I think that's one of our key spiritual obligations as humans is to create beauty, right?
beauty, and that
So,
the
yeah,
beauty is healing. And they've shown that if people have windows, they do better and they heal faster. And, you know,
yeah.
may we birth beauty and love back into the world together, Amy.
Yes, yes. May it be so. Thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope it is the beginning of many more.
Many more. Let's talk more soon.
Yes. All right. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Thank you. You
Bye.
too.